Hey, would you like to know how to slow down and reverse your aging? My guest on this show is a medical doctor who has written a fantastic book called Cheating Death: The New Science of Living Longer and Better. We discuss many items from preventative blood tests to screening to biological age tests, sugar lowering compounds and pharmaceuticals, bioidentical hormones, and much, much more. Make sure to check out this episode. If you're interested in getting thicker, fuller, and stronger hair, make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 ways of naturally stimulating hair follicles to regrow the thicker and fuller hair that you deserve. So make sure to check out fullyvital.com. If you're enjoying the shows on this channel, then please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to help you slow down and reverse your aging so you can look and feel younger and live your best life. With that said, make sure to subscribe to this channel and let's get on with the video. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Rand McClain, who earned his medical degree at Western University and completed his internship at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine Residency program. He's worked with some of the best and original innovators in sports, Rejuvenative, Regenerative, Cosmetic, and family medicine. As a founder of RSM, Dr. Rand works with elite athletes, celebrities, CEOs, and anybody else who wants to make the most of what is available to optimize their health. He's a medical advisor to Vitalix, a member of the medical advisory board for American Cryostem, which are leaders in stem cell technology. He's also on the medical advisory board of Zen Foods and the chief medical officer for LCR Health Supplements, and serves on the board of advisors for Maximus, immense testosterone telemedicine company. With that said, Dr. McClain, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Well, thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just reading your bio, it looks like you're not doing enough, man. You got to step it up. You got to do more.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. Probably better to focus more. I know that's what most would say, right? You don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. But I'm having fun with all those projects, so it's worth it.
Yeah, I hold no judgment. So please tell us your background. You wrote a book, which we'll talk about shortly, but I would love to hear about your background. Explain that to listeners, how you became a doctor, and also how you got involved in longevity.
Well, background sort of folds into how I became a doctor because, it really started when I was a kid, and I pulled a book off the shelf. My mother was one of the first quote unquote nutritionists. She wasn't an RD or anything close to that, but she was really conscious of the food she gave us. We used to eat wheat germ pancakes, I joke, because they were terrible, but good for you, right? And then, I got into sport and wanted to do better in sport. And, I learned about how nutrition can help that a lot. Then I wanted to learn other things. Went through a lot, I got not quite as far as I wanted to go in sport, but along the way suffered a lot of injuries, a lot of setbacks, including really amounts to a broken neck. And so I've had a lot of spine surgeries and just a lot of having to do repair work. And that really led me into medicine because I had to do a lot of my own research. I always say you're your best health advocate. And with the internet now, of course, you can do your own research, although it can get dangerous when you look up things on Dr. Google. But anyway, I did. And I learned a lot of things the hard way too. But really that led me into the field I'm in now, which is sports and regenerative medicine. Everyone wants to live a better life. I've never met anybody so far that says, hey, I'll trade longevity a quality of life for longevity. Mm-hmm. Most people would say, hey, just give me better quality no matter what. The beauty is that now we have resources that allow us to do both. In other words, stretch our health span, which is a combination of both being healthy and living a long time. So it's really been, to answer your question, sort of a game of learning and putting that to use for others, and it just kind of came naturally.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, you certainly look the part. You look very healthy, and you look like you're jacked. So that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
They certainly fit the bill there. You recently wrote a book called Cheating Death: The New Science of Living Longer and Better. So tell me why you wrote the book and what are some of the things you learned as you went about writing that book? I'm sure it took a while.
It did. It was a lot of fun, though. I did it really for a simple reason. I wanted to spread the word, as they say. it seemed a little frustrating, more than a little frustrating to me, that I was doing this on a one by one basis. People were coming into my office and I was saying the same things over and over again. And it seemed like, changing a lot of the ignorance of what's out there. And not only with the patients, through the patients, I hear about, well, my doctor says that stem cells are baloney. And you just go, excuse me?
Mhm.
And so the motivation was to get the word out, as I said. And uh, I'm sorry, what was the other part of the question? You said
Yeah, and what did you
parts of
learn
the,
in the process while you were writing the book?
oh, yeah. What I what I learned is that writing a book is a totally different process than I thought it was. And the good part was I got to go, deeper into the things that I enjoy. So I could really get into the weeds. The part I learned the hard way is that no one's interested in the weeds. And as they say in the book business, they killed a lot of my babies. I'd go in there and try and, talk about these things in a simple way, for someone who doesn't want to know all the terms and doesn't want to get too deep. And they were like, nope, nope. But I had a really good helper in a ghostwriter, Bruce, who took my nerd speak, as it were, and put it into something much, much more familiar and easy to understand without all the lingo. And so, yeah, it was a learning process. It was a lot, but worth it. Worth it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the book?
At least a couple years. Um, and I was steady at it. Like I say, a lot of it was removed. I still have all the earlier stuff, which a lot of it was voice memo, and then Bruce would go ahead and translate it for me, into non-nerd speak. But
Mhm.
yeah, it took a long time, but it was fun. Like I say, it's part of the reason I got into this. Like I said earlier, I really enjoyed it. It was for a lot of self-interest earlier, and then just, wow, this is great stuff. Really, going back to that original question, I remember traveling across the country and I found out I was going to be a father. And I had to, at that point, I felt like I had to decide what I'm going to do for the rest of my
Yeah.
life, quit jumping around to different jobs. And
Mhm.
that's when I said, hey, I'm going to be a doctor because I really love this stuff. So, yeah, it all ties together. I had a blast. It did take a long time, longer than I thought. And it's still not, officially published. It's open for pre-sale and all that kind of stuff. But I'm hoping that it will do what it's supposed to do. And again, that's to educate both the so-called layperson, the patient, and maybe some of the doctors out there, the ones that are saying that stem cells don't work, and
Mhm.
uh, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy is going to kill you, or going to be cancer or heart attacks, and all kinds of stuff, which I refer to as propaganda, but really old school thinking.
Mhm.
Anyway, I can go off on a lot of
Yeah,
tangents here, but
totally.
I'll stop.
Totally. Well, I will say this, the book is very easy to read, even for a layperson. And some of the diagrams in there are very helpful because they set the context and help you understand what is being said. So I think you guys did a very good job in getting the book out there. So let's talk about the overarching thought process that you have around longevity and how the body ages and what's coming down in the future. So tell us about your overarching philosophy on this subject of longevity, and how you think we're going to overcome the aging.
Overall philosophy, that's kind of a tough one. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way. Really, I guess the idea of countering aging, increasing health span, as we like to say now, is multifaceted. There's no one thing that you can concentrate on. And of course, that's not just a factor of aging is multifactorial, but also individuals are very different. There's some people that say may be prone to cancer more so than others, and they better focus more on trying to keep DNA intact and avoid mutations or fixing them. For example, you may have some people that are more prone to heart disease, and so everyone's a little different that way. But the philosophy is, well, learn as much as you can so you can take advantage of the options that fit your particular scenario. Try to make it fun. Try and find motivation behind it so you don't skip your workouts, for example, and really also make it clear that it is efficacious. Make it clear that it's not that hard to do, so that you don't say, I've already gone down this road. I've been a smoker 50 years. what am I going to get out of this? I might as well keep smoking. No, to let people know, to change the ignorance, that's out there, that no, there are plenty of opportunities to reverse the course of your health for the better. And I guess, is that my philosophy? I go back to spreading the word, yeah, and never giving up, I guess.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So, what we're learning is that biological age is different from chronological age, or how long you've been present physically in this world. And you mentioned that in your book as well. There are methylation clocks that can take one prick of your blood and they can figure out how you're doing from a biological age standpoint. There's also clocks that can measure the health of your immune system or the age of your immune system. So there's a lot of advancements that are being made in this field, especially with measuring, and then you can take some interventions and then go back and measure again to see how you're doing on some of those markers. Are there particular markers that you like to track before and after, or at least at the current moment, to get a sense of where people are so they can work to improve some of those?
Absolutely. We use them. We've developed an app we call it the death clock. And
Death clock.
we use it to we use it to estimate biological age, which is somewhat controversial because the idea is clear, but which markers we can use more accurately, we'll call it, than others is up for grabs amongst the community of anti-agers. Certainly, Horvath's DNA methylation test has a lot of science behind it, and I think that's pretty well accepted as a good marker. Ditto for telomere length, although there's some caveats there because we know, for example, cancer, you see longer telomeres than you want to see in a healthy person sometimes, so it can get a little confusing. But the idea is with the app we put together to combine a lot of those, we used multivariate regression analysis, which is really still the best standard we have to look at some of these numbers, and it'll be ever evolving as we get more and more data and see what what tends to compare best. And I think more importantly than, we'll call it, its accuracy, is its precision, because as you pointed out, the importance of it is not to say, well, I'm 60, but my biological age is 40, so much as, hey, I'm 60, but because of what I'm doing, or maybe in the case of, okay, I'm not happy with my biological age, I'm 60, but it says I'm 65. What I'm going to do, what I can apply, whether it's better diet, more rest, stopping smoking, let's see how it works to decrease my biological age. That's what's important. So the relative changes. And I think that's where it's going to be applied. And again, you mentioned it. That makes it quantifiable to some degree, certainly adds motivation, right? But it is. I mean, between just the two I mentioned, telomere length and DNA methylation, I believe the former, they've said, is pretty close to about 1.5 years in terms of so-called accuracy. DNA methylation, I think, does about half that, or 6 months. So, we've got some markers that there's some agreement with, and then there's other things that, just based upon the statistics, where you were born, your level of education, stuff like that, help us determine, and we can weight them differently, of course. And that's where I think the app's going to come in handy over time. As we amass more and more data, we can start weighting these better and get better numbers. So,
yeah, totally.
Useful tool.
Useful tools, absolutely. And once you measure them for the first time, and also some of the other ones like HbA1c and HACRP, your levels of inflammation and your levels of sugar, once you understand what those are, and you can put in some principles, practices in place for 6 months, not that long, 3 to 6 months, and then measure again, and you see a marked improvement, it gives you motivation that you can hang your hat on this and say, okay, now I've made incremental gains. Now I can do better. Because I don't think any of us want to get old. I think the loss of youth is something that everybody's scared of, everybody doesn't like, because what comes with middle age: weight, obesity, metabolic impairments, diabetes, and other diseases of aging. And really, we want to look as good as we did when we were in high school. So hopefully that's coming in the next couple of decades where we can reverse age. But for now, we can, and for some folks, they want to do the best that they can to look young and feel young as well. And so in terms of, there's this idea that if we live long enough, then we can catch this train that's coming with the longevity, and we can live much longer because every year we get incremental improvements in technology and pharmaceuticals and supplements, or we find new ways to slow down or reverse the aging process. But before we do that, we've got to weed out and find any big challenges or setbacks we might have because of our DNA or because there's a cancer that's developing that we're not aware of. So what might be some big tests that you should get out of the way immediately just to get a baseline and make sure you don't have something big brewing inside you?
Great question. I have to add on to what you said there, though. I think it's from Ray Kurzweil. Live long enough to live longer,
Forever.
or live long enough to live forever, because
Yeah.
you keep learning and you keep advancing, and hopefully we can keep catching on and grabbing a few more years as we go. But that one's a pretty easy one to answer, even per mainstream medicine right now. You mentioned a lot of things that we can manipulate, and that's motivating. But one thing we can't is our literal age. I mean, our actual age, chronological age, right? That is really the biggest risk factor for, I want to say every disease, but let me be careful and say just about every disease, right?
Mhm.
And so we found statistically that around about age 50 for the average person, that mythical being that doesn't exist, but statistically, the yield on some of these screening tests is much greater. So that really, if you follow the guidelines for regular testing, and it can be adjusted, say, for if you have a first degree relative, for example, who had a heart attack, and so you might want to check for plaque earlier than normal. 5 years earlier is the typical recommendation. But 50 years old is when things start to go the wrong direction statistically. Again,
Mhm.
roughly 50 years old. So we get the colon screening, typically a colonoscopy. We get the mammograms. We can get the heart screening. I'm not too happy about the way that's working these days. I think I point that out in the book because we kind of beat around the bush with an EKG, which is testing the electrical system. It can sometimes reflect the plumbing too. An echocardiogram, we can pick up some major plumbing problems that really have more to do with the muscle than the vasculature. But again, it all gets mixed together, right? But it's usually gross stuff. We've all heard the story of the friend of the family who still had his hand on the door of the cardiologist's office after having received high marks, flying colors for his stress test, and has a heart attack right there.
Mhm.
It's not the best way of testing. So imaging the walls of the arteries, I think, is a much better way to do it. And with advances in technology, where we're getting much less radiation, I think it's crazy not to go through that, because and I'm speaking specifically of a coronary CT angiogram, but it's there's almost no excuse for dying of these diseases, because we screen them early enough, we can detect a problem and correct it, right?
Mhm.
So one I didn't mention is prostate cancer. I believe the number is 97% success rate in treating prostate cancer, meaning nobody dies from it if we catch it early enough. And what's called the digital rectal exam, the DRE, is really ridiculous. We think about it, not to get too into detail, but probably the longest finger the doctor has, and the tip of it reaches a sort of hopefully it's not too boggy or mushy, but it's a relative, it's a soft tissue organ. It's about the size of a walnut, and you certainly can't feel the entire thing, and you're making an estimate on is there a growth there? Come on.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
growth can be as small as we can pick up something through imaging, which is a multi-parametric MRI, something as small as 3 millimeters. You're not going to pick that up with your finger. I don't care if you've done it 10,000 times, which that's another thing. I mean, that's the measure. You're an athlete. How many times does it take to swing at a baseball with a baseball bat before you're considered proficient? Generally accepted as 10,000 times. Do you think he or she's done that 10,000 times? Probably not, unless
Mhm.
they're really old. So, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but my point is that we have those great screening tools now. We should take advantage of them, and we have more coming where we can use liquid biopsies, like the Grail test, and we've got others coming down through the pike. I have a very good friend who's developing his own. I was not given the permission to mention it in the book, and I
Mhm.
still can't tell you about it, but it relates to the old Oncoblot test, and for what amounts to maybe $200, we can do some liquid biopsies that are going to detect almost every form of cancer we have. And come on, that gives us such a leg up
Yeah,
when we find that out early.
totally. Because then you have some real tools to get after it, as opposed to finding out it's a stage 4 and that's metastasized. Then it's a challenge at that point. So you've had your own health journey, health issues, health problems that you've overcome. Do you want to share your journey and what tools you use to overcome those?
I'd be happy to. I wrote down as much as I could recall in the book, but then I wake up sometimes think, oh, I forgot to mention that. I have had what most would consider a rough ride when it comes to these sort of things. A lot of it, I have to admit, was self-inflicted because whether it's playing too hard, working too hard, or both of the above. If you don't listen to your body telling you to stop, which by the way is the way we're trained as athletes, right? Remember the old no pain, no gain, which I argue should be to steal from Tom. Not gonna remember his name, but he used to work with the NASM, but he would say no brain, no gain, right? Much better way to look at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wasn't always the smartest when it came to some of the things I took on as a challenge. But I've had everything from several significant spinal issues from top to bottom. Most of my neck is fused. Most of my lumbar is fused. But before you start going, oh, gee whiz, I mean, it's not holding me back. So no, and thanks in part to a lot of what we're talking about here, the great medicine that we have available to us. But I had my own bout of prostate cancer. I'm still dealing with skin cancers because I grew up in Florida. Now we were talking earlier about, here we are, or I am in Southern California. I used to be out here. It's hard to protect yourself from what we want to enjoy all the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of in between stuff, from appendectomies to tonsillectomies to multiple broken extremities. Yeah, I've been through a few things. I had bacterial meningitis. I got the treat of being in the ICU for a week in a coma at UCLA for a while.
Wow.
But yeah, I got to treat it with a lot of these things that I talk about in the book came along at right at the right time for me anyway, and I took advantage of them.
Yeah, totally. And I have to say, you look great, man. So whatever you're doing,
thanks for saying so.
Totally works. And yeah, I'd love to see you keep practicing or doing whatever you love for the next 50, 60, 80 years. Okay.
Amen. Well, let me interject there that I think the biggest factor, you might ask me this one way or the other, might as well tell you now, exercise. Okay. Now I just got through saying, I might have overdone it back in the day, but the proper dose of exercise, I think, is the great equalizer. And I've said this since the day I started practice, even before that, to all my patients. They'll back me up. I used to just say, hey, look, I can help you with some of the things you're looking for. A lot of people come for hormone replacement therapy. They're right here. I said, exercise way up here, because it really does do so many things. I mean, people are talking about, just as an example, NAD, right? You've heard about, NAD, whether it be for oral use or IV use. Do you know how you produce more NAD than just about any other way?
Exercise.
You're shaking your head, of course. Yeah. I mean, part of the process, you're breaking down, you're say, converting pyruvate to lactate, and you've got the the NAD shedding the hydrogen as part of that process. And there you go. You got the NADH, shedding that hydrogen. There you go. There's your NAD plus. So, and then, they talk about what that does to your system, and we can go on and on about the values of it. So anyway, just want to slide that one in there real quick.
Yeah, totally. And you're absolutely right. And you touch about these in your book. There's the big 4 that you got to do before you start adding on supplements or doing advanced regenerative technologies or injecting stem cells every 2 months. You have got to manage your sleep well. You've got to exercise. You've got to eat well, and you got to manage your stress. I mean, those are the basics that you have to get in place. You can't, you could be carrying 60 extra pounds and getting stem cell injections, but there's so much inflammation in your body from the excess adipose tissue that it would be worthwhile to maybe do exercise first and use different modalities, and then use the stem cells for much greater effect. And so that's the philosophy that I follow, and you lay out in your book as well, and how to target some of these areas. Let's talk about blood flow or circulation, which you bring up in your book. And I'm a big supporter of it, and I don't see enough of it in books or literature that I find online when it relates to longevity. What men, you and I, experience or at least men overall experience with circulation is fairly obvious because they get erectile dysfunction. And a lot of my friends in Los Angeles even take the blue pill in their 30s. And I'm going, you're in your 30s. What are you doing? But they need it, or it's a confidence thing or whatever. But we see it firsthand. I don't know if women see it that obviously, but for us, it's very, very obvious. And so how is circulation important for a healthy body as we age? And how can we improve it with what foods or supplements?
Well, wow, you hit on a lot there, and absolutely. You can argue that the reasons for the blue pill can go beyond the need for it, right? But if we're talking about, having an issue with deficient circulation, we'll call it, okay, then yeah, I mean that it normally we look to the cardiovascular system. That's a harbinger of things to come if you start with erectile function, especially when you're young like that. And how do you protect against that? Dr. Nathan Bryan will do a much better job of this than I will, because he's studied with the Nobel Prize winner and everything with regard to nitric oxide. But first of all, we have nitric oxide synthase within, that can be created within the vasculature, and that's activated by exercise. Here we go back again. But also things that we eat are very important for the nitric oxide formation. The nitrates in food, some already have nitrites. A lot of the green leafies, and particularly beets, you've probably heard of that already. Most people have, are very good at that. But the thing is, you have to have the right bacteria in your mouth. So anything that would kill it, from hydrogen peroxide to Listerine, actually does what it said it does. It kills bacteria. But along with the so-called bad, or the ones that cause bad breath, you kill a lot of the good ones that convert. So it's unfortunate. I think it's a reflection of what's happening with the younger generation. You can do so much without having to exercise these days. I mean, so much is tech oriented. I mean, I go on about the problems, but the fixes, get out and exercise, eat better. And to your point, you said earlier, of course, these modalities we have at our disposal would be much better used if you drop the 60 pounds. But either way, they can help you. So, while stem cells are going to be fighting a lot more inflammation, I think to your point, when you're 60 pounds, hey, they'll still help you now. And so I wouldn't eschew some of the things that are available to the person who's trying to get, back to your point, better blood flow. For example, there's some nitric oxide precursors that you can take that until you get back on your feet, literally with your right cardiovascular exercise program, will help in the meantime, if that makes sense. L-citrulline, L-arginine. As a matter of fact, Dr. Bryan has a great product, and this is not a plug. He's not going to send me a free toaster for saying it is a great product. Inno2.com, I think, is the name of it. God, I'm terrible with it. But Dr. Nathan Bryan. But we have supplements, is what I'm getting at, where you can very easily, you don't even have to wait for it to convert. The supplement he has made, acts within minutes. And again, you can protect yourself until you get the basics down, like you said. You mentioned inflammation. I mean, we're talking about, we have a new word, inflammaging. If you're not sleeping right, if you're not eating right, if you're not exercising properly, and if you haven't reduced stress the best you can, you're going to have a lot of inflammation. This definitely affects blood flow. And, fortunately, we have a lot of fixes, but the basics are always the most important, right?
Yeah, totally. And I've had Dr. Nathan Bryan on the show. So if people are interested in that, in that topic, you can go back and listen to that podcast as well, that episode. Okay. We also, on your book, you talked about, in fact, just today, I had a discussion with another doctor, Dr. Lufkin from UCLA, also went to USC Keck, who's one of the leading voices on rapamycin. And in your book, you talk about rapamycin, but also metformin. And metformin it's a surprising drug, surprising find in the field of longevity, because there was one fantastic study in 2014 that found that diabetics that were taking metformin actually outlived normal people without diabetes And that was so shocking because we all think that diabetes is problematic, and it is in a lot of ways. But metformin was able to stave off a lot of those problems that diabetes brings, just by taking it. And so my dad takes it because he's got type 2 diabetes, and that in a way makes me a little bit satisfied because I'm like, okay, he's protected. He's going to do well. And at some point I started taking it, but then I got off it. I'm doing berberine for now. And I know Gymnema, also Sylvester, which is, it literally translates to sugar killer in Indian language. It just scoops up the extra sugar in your bloodstream. These are very effective ways of reducing your sugar load and helping saving your arteries from damage, saving your proteins from damage from the sugar, and reducing the side effects of diabetes. So thoughts on metformin and how you're seeing it in your practice or otherwise?
What I like most about metformin is it brings to fore the mechanisms by which we can screw up the system and therefore age. Mm-hmm. And yeah, you've already mentioned some of the things, and there's banana leaf and gynostemma. There are other ones that do, and berberine. You mentioned you can actually use berberine in a milligram for milligram match to metformin, or at least metformin extended release, and it's almost identical, although it works more through something called a PPAR agonist, but the upshot is the same, right? We've learned to limit sugar in the bloodstream. And when you do that, you set off these different mechanisms, AMPK. I'm sure you probably talked about that on your show before. Yeah. And again, I keep going back to exercise. We learn more and more about what works and ways to activate it. That's why I love metformin. Now, Niles Barzilay has done a wonderful job of amassing these studies. By the way, the thing about the 2014 study to which you reference is, what's interesting is, yes, the diabetics on metformin live longer than the people that did not have type 2 diabetes, but it's important to note, and not treated. We believe now that those that don't have diabetes and are yet nevertheless treated will live even longer than both of those groups. That's the key to that, right? And so Niles has tried to put together, I think they're still waiting on funding, although I think they're close. They call it the TAME study, targeting aging with metformin. And hopefully that ties it together in a nice, neat little package so that it really may become the first quote unquote anti-aging drug approved by the FDA. Like, I think, not to go too far afield, but semaglutides might be the first chronic obesity treatment ever approved. We got all these things that talk about, well, it's a weight loss pill. Well, no, it's an appetite suppressant. It's basically legal speed, phentermine. But now that we've learned the mechanisms, and this, yeah, see, you're smiling. I am too. I'm getting excited because think about it. The more we learn this, the more we're going to open up more doors. And that's really what I love about metformin. Plus, it's cheap. It's easy. I just mentioned semaglutide. We're going to find out. We don't have enough studies yet, but it works very similarly. And by the way, in the meantime, with the exception, I don't know why you switched off metformin, but a lot of people have some GI upset with that, so they'll go to berberine as a backup. But and by the way, the semaglutides can have that nausea attached to it too. But we have so many options. We're going to find. I started to say semaglutide, I think, is going to show us the same thing. But to get to the same cheese, we have many alternatives. There's really no excuse anymore.
Yeah.
But metformin has been around for a long time. We have so many studies that show essentially it's harmless unless you have stage 4 kidney disease, and even then you could technically use it. You just have to watch out for something called lactic acidosis, which no one needs to worry about unless you have that disease process going.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I'm looking forward to Dr. Barzilay's TAME study kicking off, because if that is successful, and we're all crossing our fingers in the longevity field that is, then we might have a chance with the FDA to register aging as a disease. And if aging can be a disease that we can go after, then we can divert some of the funding, billions and billions, maybe even trillions, if you count all the countries around the world that have been targeting all of these diseases of aging. If we could divert that money into just focusing on aging as the disease, then it would really help and hopefully get us more solutions to this problem, which is very, very complex. And
That's
okay,
more important than the rationale you have presented there, because I don't think the average person knows how hard it is to get funding.
mhm,
So without private funding, which, that's hit or miss, your point is even bigger made than just, what the average person would understand. Without that, the funding is not available publicly. So
right.
we won't have these NIH studies until it happens like you say it should, hopefully will happen, right?
Mhm.
That's very important. You make a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. And hopefully sooner than later. Okay. Awesome. I want to talk to you just because you look very jagged, Dr. McClain, is about bioidentical hormones. And we've belabored on this podcast multiple times over women taking estrogen and how that is, in its current form, bioidentical estrogen is not as harmful as we thought when the women's study was going on in 2002, or when it was stopped, I guess, in 2002. And so, um, in terms of men and or women, how are you approaching bioidentical hormones? At what age do people typically start them? What are some side effects, if any? So give us your philosophy on that and how you like to approach maybe giving bioidentical hormones to folks.
Well, when you talk about the Women's Health Initiative and estrogens used in that study, unfortunately, well, first of all, the study was a very helpful, great study in many ways. So I don't want to use any particularly pejorative terms referencing it, but they did use something called Premarin, which stands for pregnant mare urine. And unfortunately, roughly half of that is equilin. And equilin is a horse estrogen, which is 1,000 times more potent, for example, in human uterus than is estradiol, which is roughly the other half of that formulation. So you could see how we might have some issues. And while they were statistically significant, it wasn't like, okay, 90% of the people are going to develop cancer or stroke. We found, I believe it was an 8 in 10,000 increase in both of those, increased risk of stroke and estrogen sensitive cancers in women who took the estrogen, but again, in the form of Premarin. So we haven't done another study as large or as not nearly as powerful as the Women's Health Initiative, but anecdotally speaking, in millions by now of bioidentical hormone replacement treatments that include this estrogen, we haven't seen the same problem. Because with bioidenticals, not only we're not using the estrone family, which contains the at least two that we know cause estrogen sensitive cancers, both in females and males, the 16 alpha hydroxyestrone and 4 hydroxyestrone. We're using largely, typically 80% estriol, okay, which is much less powerful and much less likely. They depending upon what study you read, estriol could be actually anti-carcinogenic at best, and certainly neutral at worst.
Mm-hmm.
Estradiol, I think, is more and more studied as being neutral, although there were some studies that suggest it might be considered carcinogenic. But if you look at some of the studies, you'll see they're a bit flawed, because these estrogens, when introduced into the system, can change. One of the things that I encourage males or females to do is eat lots of cruciferous vegetables. Right? You know what? You're nodding your head. You know why? Because the cauliflower, the broccoli, the Brussels sprouts, the mustard greens, they contain indole 3-carbinol or diindolylmethane. I would call it DIM or I3C, and they can both protect against conversion from the good estrogens to the bad, and also convert the bad to the good. So, some of those studies were a little flawed because we didn't know about it back then. Okay, but again, how do I decide whether to prescribe these? Symptoms. I say it over and over again, and good physicians, I think, do. And I don't mean to say, okay, good physician, but my point is, the ones that go by the numbers alone make a mistake. And a gentleman, Abraham Morgenthaler, who chaired an international consensus, made a big point of this back in 2015. It was presented, I think, in the Mayo Clinic proceedings in 2016. He said, look, there's no line in the sand. You treat the patient, you don't treat the numbers. And that was a boon for anyone who was interested in this area, because the standard of care was like, well, no, if it's not this line, then you can't do it. And you have this patient going, please. And the lines, of course, are not set in stone necessarily. You got, laboratory error, you got time of day, which you test, and all these things that really made it too convoluted and just a disaster for a while. Very unfortunate. Anyway, you treat the symptoms, and for estrogen deficiency, typically the first complaints are hot flashes, night sweats. As women age, that can turn to vaginal dryness because the skin of the vagina is very friable and needs that estrogen to keep it from being tender, not just with intercourse, but just really walking around. So those are the now. What do you do? I shouldn't go too far afield, but there are things we can do even if a woman has already found out maybe that she has estrogen sensitive cancers. Either extant or that have been treated, successfully. And with men, it's a different approach because we want to make sure, typically we're not prescribing estrogen to men, but we're trying to avoid the conversion from testosterone, the precursor, into excess estrogen because it can cause water retention, fat retention, moodiness and irascibility, we call it, right? Mm-hmm. And again, the effect that it can have on the prostate, which we now believe is the heart of it all. When I was in school, even the thought was that testosterone caused prostate cancer. And in fact, now, even though it was a small study of, I think, 15 people, we used something called bipolar testosterone therapy, meaning putting someone on a dose of testosterone and pulling them off to successfully treat prostate cancer. And we know now that it looks much more like, well, first of all, we all carry the genes for these prostate cancers, but they're activated by the so-called bad estrogens. And they can be fueled by, again, not testosterone, but a metabolite called dihydrotestosterone, which also plays a part in what we call benign prostatic hypertrophy in large prostate. So again, though, and to answer your question, when it comes to men, same thing. When they have symptoms is when we typically prescribe it. Symptoms are like with females with low testosterone too, diminished energy. And I say diminished compared to themselves. One of the mistakes people make is they look at their buddies and say, well, Sarah is on the couch and she's out of shape. And, compared to her, I look great. And same with, Bob over here, that's not what you want to do. You want to compare yourself to you 5, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it might be. And, decreased energy, decreased libido, decreased sense of just general well-being. And, those three you could argue are very personality driven. But the one that gets people in, that's a lock, if you will, is failure to as easily manipulate body composition. Because that's not personality driven, except very indirectly. You got to get your butt off the couch. But I'm saying, I've got pro athletes that are the last ones to come in because they know every trick in the book to manipulate their body composition. But they finally come in waving the white flag saying, doc, I don't know what's going on. I've tried everything. It just keeps getting worse and worse. Yeah, because you don't have the leverage of the testosterone anymore. Yeah. So sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question, but that's the basis of how I do it. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And there's so many more things you discuss in your book, which is called Cheating Death, the New Science of Living Longer and Better. We don't have time to get into it because we're coming up on time, but what are you most excited about, Dr. McClain, in the future of longevity, maybe this decade or next? What do you think are the things that are maybe on the horizon right now that you're most excited about that might make a big difference in how we live better and longer?
Everything I mentioned in the book is what I'm excited about. What to answer your question, it's watching these develop much more quickly than I've watched them in the 60 years I've been alive. That's what's getting exciting, is that, again, spreading the word and watching people change their focus. You mentioned earlier about, the finances coming this way to leverage that process. I tell people, I joke, if you could, and I'm not really, I have to convince my wife to do it with me, but if you could successfully put me to sleep in a cryo chamber and wake me up 100 years hence, I'd volunteer because I want to see where we go with this. We're just on the cusp of CRISPR technology, and now even better than CRISPR technology for gene editing. And every time I read the paper, I go, oh geez, I got to change that part of my book. It's too late. We've got more and more advances. That's what's exciting, is that you see these things coming to fruition, and we're not just turning dogs into purple glowing dogs, which I know that sounds ridiculous, but yeah, we've done that with gene editing. We're doing some really great work that sets back the clock that we were talking about and gives us more time more healthy time, most importantly. So yeah, whether it's gene editing or stem cell use, which by the way, the FDA challenged one of the doctors who's been leading the way for a long time out here in California, and the decision was made. The findings of fact and conclusions of law supported. I beg your pardon. I beg his pardon too, because it's on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of his name, but
Mark Berman.
Absolutely, thank you,
yeah.
Dr. Berman, who was taking the arrows for so long, was successful in his case. And if you read the findings of fact, the judge that wrote the decision or the findings of fact conclusions of law wrote it brilliantly. And it really, and the FDA had, I think, 30 days to appeal, and they did not. So it really, it's just buzzing now. It needs to be yelled louder, and we're, through you, we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
It is no longer prohibited by the FDA. They don't have a leg to stand on anymore. Now they may come up with something else, but to open up those doors, again, getting back to answering your question, that's exciting because I've seen it work. The whole world's seen it work. And, Japan, they're doing it. We can bring that here to the US. We tend to lead the world in these things. I mean, not to be a jerk, a jingoist about being a United States citizen, but it's going to open up a lot of doors. All those things that we some of which we talk about, some night, rapamycin, we're going to come up with analogs of that because, again, we're figuring out how that works, and we're going to figure out how to separate mTOR 1 from mTOR 2 effects, and that's going to advance us. I mean, and so everybody will be able to do this in one form or fashion, not just the people that have $1 million to spend on, gene editing and stem cells.
Yeah, totally. Very good points. Great points. And as we go along, the cost may be high initially, but it's going to come down. And at some point, it'll be affordable to everybody and it'll be cheap. And you can look your best and feel your best and look like you're 30 for a very long time. Dr. McClain, thank you so much for coming on. Now, please tell us, where can people find the book, your website, and if you're accepting patients or consults, or where can people find you if they want to work with you as well?
The book is on Amazon. We'll have it in the Barnes and Nobles and the other, standalone or brick and mortar shops coming up soon. The website is www.PSR Papa Sierra Romeo med.com. And yeah, we want to see as many people as we can. So, we'll keep taking patients as long as I'm alive. As we said earlier, I want to break the Guinness Book of World Records and be the longest practicing physician. Got a ways to go.
Hell yeah. Get after it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a really good conversation, and I hope to have you back in the future.
Thank you, sir. It's been my pleasure.